Now, for percents, we can use this idea of proportions and equations to help us solve problems. But there's one tricky little component to this whole thing, and it's percent of change. And the reason this is a tricky component is because you're not actually figuring out a specific value. You're not saying that something went up this amount or something went down this amount. You're saying, what percent did it increase? So a lot of times in the news, you'll hear things about population increases. We are 75% more than last year. Well, they're not saying we have 75 students or 75 people more. We're saying that we took the total and we added 75% of that total on, okay? Please put a star to denote that since we're dealing with changes, and it's the amount that it changes, the percent that something changes, the biggest thing you have to understand, you're going to subtract. Whether or not you're asked for percent of increase or decrease does not determine whether you will add or subtract. It is always going to be subtract, okay? For a percent of increase problems, the original amount is going to be smaller because it went up. For percent of decrease problems, the original amount is larger because it went down. So when dealing with percent of change, you're saying how much did it change over the original amount? And then it's going to equal percent over 100. If you don't like the proportion way or you prefer the equation way, then you will take the amount of change divided by the original amount and you'll multiply by 100. All right? Let's take a look at this in action. So here we have two problems, one of each type, and you'll notice that the directions for both say that we're going to be rounding to the nearest percent. For the first problem, it says, find the percent of increase from 45 feet to 92 feet. Even though this says percent of increase, the first thing that we want to do is we want to subtract. So we want to know how much did it go up. So we're going to come in and we're going to subtract 92 minus 45. And when we subtract 92 minus 45, that gives us 47. Okay? 47 represents our change. That's how much it changed. It changed by 47 feet. We know that 45 is our original because we went from 45 to 92. I started at 45 feet. Now we can go through and put it into our proportion. The changed amount over the original amount equals the percent over 100. We cross multiply. And then we divide to get that x is going to equal 104 point repeating 4. But it tells us to round to the nearest percent, meaning the nearest whole number, so we get 104% increase. So to move from 45 feet to 92 feet was a 104% increase. We are going to note that we should get a number more than 100. You have 47 over 45. That's an improper fraction. That means when we look at the other ratio, it needs to be an improper fraction, meaning that we need a number more than 100%. And that's okay. Because if you think of this logically, to get from 45 to 92, we had to do another set of 45 feet, and then we did 2 more. So it increased 100% and then just a little bit more. Okay? If we were doing the equation for this, we would take our change amount of 47, we'd divide it by the whole amount, or the original amount of 45, and then we'd multiply by 100. Again, either way, totally fine to do it. You go about with whichever way you prefer. Looking at the second one, we have it's percent of decrease, and we're going from 94 miles to 34 miles. First step, subtract. 94 minus 34 is going to give us 60. 60 is going to represent our change, how much we went up or how much we went down. It's our change. And in the problem, 94 in this case is our original because it is the number we started. We drove 94 miles and then we drove 34 miles. We went from 94 miles to 34 miles. Now we set up our proportion. Our changed amount of 60, because there was a 60-mile difference between the two, over the original amount of 94, and it equals the percent over 100. Again, if you prefer the equation, 60 divided by 94 times 100 will work. So if we were just doing the equation, we could go ahead and type it in the calculator, no problem. But if we're doing the proportion, we go through and we cross multiply and get 94x equals 6,000. At this point, I'm assuming you know how to cross multiply it, so that's why you're getting just the abbreviated work. And we get that x is going to equal 63.829, blah, blah, blah. Keeps going on forever and ever and ever. What we're being asked to do is round to the nearest percent, so I don't care about the 2 and the 9. All I want to know is what is that 8 going to do to that 3? 8's going to make it 8's going to make it go up. So we get 64%. And technically for both of these, we should have squiggles instead of equals after we divided and found what x was, because we ended up having to round those answers, so that's why the squiggles and not the equals. Just a mathematical thing to help broaden your horizons. So that in a nutshell is percent of change, also known as percent of increase or percent of decrease.